welcome onto the show, Gabriel and Urban. It has been so good chatting with y'all over the past few years, and somehow I've realized that I had not had y'all on Opt Out at all, even though I've been on your podcast, Watchman Privacy. We've chatted in person, Urban, had some really good conversations. So I'm really excited to have y'all on. Y'all bring a wide breadth of knowledge to the privacy and security space, building out some fantastic educational resources. I'm super excited for this. For those who maybe don't know either of you guys, do you mind just introducing yourself, telling us a little bit about what you're up to, and then we'll roll from there.
Yeah, well, thank you for having us on, Seth. I'm Gabriel, Custodiet, and I also have a podcast, Watchman Privacy. I've been doing that for a few years, and it covers a broad range of privacy topics. I know that your show is focused on digital privacy. We do talk about some of that, and we also talk about physical privacy, jurisdictional privacy, which I think we'll get into in a little bit. That is, moving around and things of this sort. And other kind of radical topics on privacy. So that's Watchman Privacy. I've been doing that for a few years, and I leveraged that after a couple of years into a shop called EscapeTheTechnocracy.com. And so Urban and I work on that, and that is a online shop that sells tutorials and toolkits for like cryptocurrencies and things of this sort. That is privacy related educational stuff. We have a newsletter as well, and so that's kind of the big picture overview of where I'm coming from. I've been living a pure privacy lifestyle for a few years now. Basically, a few years ago, I really decided to go hardcore on privacy, very hardcore, and so I just really went down the rabbit hole. I had been consuming a lot of Michael Bazel's resources, and I thought it was very refreshing, especially his take on physical privacy, which I didn't think was talked about enough. So I really went down that rabbit hole and followed a lot of that advice. I found some of it lacking. I found he was maybe not talking about certain other things. So I decided to go my own direction and start my own brand. And yeah, a few years later, we have a podcast that's going on almost 200 episodes. A lot of them are interviews with a lot of interesting people talking about these different topics. And that's what I've been doing for the last bit of time.
Awesome. Then how about you, Urban?
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I will try to keep this brief. I have been working in cybersecurity for now a very long time. I've done consulting from, a large group of people on like a Monday morning in a company to like C-level private advice. And yeah, I think by helping people, I realized how things were becoming harder and harder. 10 years ago, you would tell people to install a password manager and use a VPN, and that would be the end of it. And nowadays, it's just becoming so much harder. And I kind of went along with it. I also have a passion in video game development, and I've worked in that era as well. And it's something I try to bring into my presentation. I always strive for making something that is engaging, that is interesting, and try to avoid, the typical very boring, sysadmin explaining you things. So I try to make things as interesting and as entertaining as possible. So that's my background, and yeah, we can go a bit more in depth later on.
Yeah, I love that you're coming from a cybersecurity background too. I think it's fairly common in the privacy space, since once you're in that world, it helps you to understand not only the technicals of like how the tools work, how simple surveillance can be, but also the importance of like taking action as an individual. So I definitely love that crossover. I am really curious. Like I know that we've talked about this a little bit privately, but how did the two of you get connected? Like what brought you together to start working on these things as a pair instead of just doing these things solo?
Yeah, it's a interesting. I like Urban quite a lot. He came at a time. Basically, he was somebody who was familiar with me from some of the work I was doing, and we just started messaging, and it kind of went from there. I had him on the show. He proved to be a really cool guy, and one thing I've learned, Seth, is that it's not easy to work with just anybody. I've been in bad working relationships even recently, and so you know, been talking to Urban for a while. We get along. He complements certain things that I am less knowledgeable on the technical side, for example, and so it's a good relationship, and as I said, I think we complement each other, and it's one of those partnerships where two people working together is, we produce much more than 2x, which is always a good sign of a partnership. So we've been at this now, talking and chatting and helping each other for the last bit of time, and only recently really kind of decided to put our heads together and form Escape the Technocracy. So yeah, that's kind of the background there.
Nice. Yeah, it is tricky to find people. I feel like especially in the podcasting and education space, it really has to be something where there's a lot of symbiosis there, because it's very problematic very quickly. But it seems like y'all have really found that. I do want to dive in a little bit more onto the Watchman Privacy pod. For those who haven't heard it, stop this, take a second, go subscribe. He's got fantastic guests, a wide variety of topics. Definitely recommend that. But a little bit more about that podcast. I mean, you've been doing this for a few years now. I feel like as a podcaster, you get some maybe some insider insight into the privacy world, into what's going on behind the scenes with the guests that you get to have on. What have been your main takeaways and lessons learned from the Watchman Privacy podcast? Whether that be guests or topics that have been most interesting, or maybe just kind of what has worked, what's failed as part of that process, what's pissed you off in the privacy space. I'm curious your take with kind of being in the trenches of privacy education for a few years now.
Yeah, that's a good question. Maybe I'll start with why I decided to create it. I think we created our shows around the same time, and I created mine because I wasn't really happy with a lot of the privacy stuff that was out there. And I wasn't aware of opt out for the first year or so of
You
my
hated my
doing
podcast so much you
it.
created your own.
So
Wow.
many caveats here. So I was not aware of your show at all when I'm about to say what I'm about to say, Seth. And so I wasn't really content with some of the privacy stuff out there. I mentioned Michael Bazzell, but he wasn't really talking about things like Monero or privacy Bitcoin, things of this sort. And for a while, he wasn't talking about physical privacy either. And he didn't talk so much, let's say, jurisdictional privacy, that is internationalization, living in a van, things of this sort, which were more radical, I think, very important topics. And so I kind of just started off, discussing some of the more forbidden topics. I think the algorithms have hated me ever since. I also brought in philosophy from day one. I think that if you don't have a good sense of the correct moral philosophy of individualism, you're what are we talking about? I remember the early days of getting into privacy and checking that god awful privacy Reddit subreddit, and just a lot of screeds against huge corporations and capitalism and surveillance capitalism. And I just thought it was a very shallow take. And I don't think that communism has any support within its ideology for privacy whatsoever. Communism, socialism, left leaning whatsoever. I don't think there's any room for privacy in a lot of those philosophies. So I brought in philosophy from day one. Talked about some forbidden subjects. Cryptocurrencies were always a big topic from day one. And, I'll talk about cultural things as well. So I'm just looking at some of my early episodes. We're talking about central bank digital currencies. We're talking about privacy and psychopaths, and how, understanding what a psychopath is can actually help you to understand some of what goes on in terms of politics and the world, and the people who do not believe that you should have privacy because they literally cannot conceive of other people, which is what happens when you're a psychopath and you don't have empathy. And so the show is really, I would say, it casts a wide net in terms of how we understand privacy, and the politics that need to be in place, the philosophy that needs to be in place in order to have privacy. And then, of course, we do absolutely get into the tactics, and we keep it pretty broad as well. One of my early guests was somebody who creates pods where you can live out in the sea and basically become a sovereign citizen out in the ocean. So that was kind of just representative of the way that I thought about this. Like, all options are on the table, right? I don't want to get in trouble legally, but for the most part, all options are on the table in the podcast. And 200 episodes later, we're talking about cryptocurrencies. We're talking about self-defense. We're talking about gun laws. We're talking about, obviously, the technical stuff as well, in kind of more of a lifestyle way. Instead of getting although Urban has brought this later on, instead of getting into the nitty gritty of the technical stuff, we just kind of use it as a way to understand, here's how this will apply to your life, as opposed to just something in the abstract. So I think it's an interesting show. I think we've produced some really cool episodes. And yeah, I'd encourage people subscribe to Watchman Privacy. Just scroll down to the bottom, and check out some episodes that interest you.
Yeah, I definitely agree too. I like that you have focused more on the philosophical, because it's not something I ever considered. Like when I started my podcast, I had no interest in the philosophical. Like my thought process just wasn't there. I was
Sure.
really more focused on like asking specific people, like, why do you want privacy, and like what are the tools you're using. I really wanted to like only get practical, but I quickly learned that just like you mentioned, if you only focus on the technicals and the specifics, not only does it lack a certain weight, like there's not a deeper seated reasoning for the things that you're doing, but also I found it's really easy to become demoralized when you don't have like for lack of a better term, a core worldview around how you're approaching this stuff, like why you're approaching sacrificing some convenience for better privacy, or like why you're approaching looking into moving to a different country so that you have better laws protecting you, or less stringent laws stopping you from doing things. Like, unless you have a kind of a framework to work through, it can be really demoralizing quickly when you just see the state of things falling apart in so many jurisdictions. So I definitely agree with that. Like some of the most interesting conversations to me early on in my pod were not the technical ones, but were the ones where people got really philosophical. Like I had a guy who goes by Smuggler. He came on the podcast. He had some fascinating ideas around like how privacy is necessary for human intimacy, and like these just very fascinating topics that aren't your normal like use Signal to protect your messaging, but actually getting into more of the broader topics on like why this stuff is important. So I definitely do value that, and I also like that y'all get very broad in what you talk about, because something that's also very important is if I focus too heavily on just the things that I'm interested in, which is normally what I do in my pod, it makes it very narrow in focus. Whereas for people who aren't sure exactly that they want to be like Seth for privacy, maybe you don't have the specific interests I do, or you don't have the specific threat model I do. It's really nice to be able to kind of like taste and see what else is out there in terms of threat modeling, in terms of how hardcore you want to go, in terms of the tools and technologies. So I definitely have enjoyed that from your show over the years.
Yeah, and I find there's lots of people talking about the digital stuff, and that's great. So we've also branched out a little bit. I'm just looking here. I've zoomed out on my Odyssey page, and I see that we're talking about privacy Bitcoin, the state of Bitcoin, kind of the current state of Bitcoin. We have an episode talking about emergency food preparation, how to get Portugal permanent residency. Portugal is the best place to get started if you want to get European Union residency. We have one on how to protect your medical privacy, where we basically explain, how you practically, as a human being, can arrange your life so that you're giving as little information to, medical facilities as possible in terms of, getting private treatment and refusing to give information when you go to the hospital and things of this sort. So very kind of practical, hands-on approach, not just, talking abstract, how do people protect the data, but like how you as a person can actually go and refuse and engage in social engineering and whatever else you need to so that you're getting your medical privacy. We have one talking about trusts recently. So yeah, it's a broad range, and I do want to try to cover basically every topic that might interest people, because there's the technical people, Seth, and then there's the, let's say, the people who are 7 years old and they're really never realistically going to download Linux or install it, but they are interested in protecting their home address, right? For example, they are interested maybe in creating a trust. And while I don't really give legal advice and things of this sort, it is a topic we can kind of open their minds to and have an expert on who talks about these sorts of things. They might be interested in leaving one of the Five Eyes countries to somewhere else, right? So Portugal or a different country like that. So do try to keep all the options on the table, realizing that while I do love the digital stuff, there is a whole other world out there that we can certainly take advantage of. And a lot of the privacy, as I got into this, when I think of either Michael Bazel's stuff, or I think of another great book, which is How to Be Invisible by J.J. Luna, the late J.J. Luna. He doesn't talk at all about digital stuff in that book, and it's still very useful and very practical. So I love talking about the social engineering, the just refusing to give information, and all that kind of stuff.
I think it's a great segue into something we were talking about before we hit record. We were just kind of touching on this latest in a string of crypto related ransoms and kidnappings. There was one in Sweden where a 30-year-old was kidnapped. They basically tortured him, like threatened to set him on fire. Crazy stuff trying to steal his cryptocurrency. And it brought up this point, like you just mentioned, that privacy is about far more than just the digital. And obviously, especially security is about far more than just the digital. Like they certainly go hand in hand, but it's one thing where if you don't have both, you certainly have a problem. I think Urban, right under Jameson Lopp's tweet, said people who focus exclusively on digital privacy are missing half of the problem. Physical privacy is as important, if not more. Like, how are y'all thinking about that in the content you create in Escape the Technocracy? Like, how do you balance and approach both the digital privacy and digital security, but also the physical privacy and physical security?
Yeah, I'll start that off quickly and then kick it over to Urban. I'm sure he has a few thoughts on this, but this is really key, I think, Seth, because a lot of the people probably listening to this show, they're sitting behind their keyboard. They might have some, LED lights on their computer next to them. They feel pretty awesome, right? They feel pretty immortal. They understand how to use a VPN, use Tor, and all the rest. But it doesn't really matter, right? If you ship your hardware wallets to your home, your Bitcoin hardware wallet to your home, and then that hardware wallet company has a data breach, and then now somebody has access to your order, to maybe your name, your home address, most importantly. And we've done an episode on that string of criminals in the US who actually tracked down some of this data, other kind of breach data, other publicly available information, and went around torturing people, Americans, and basically because they knew they had Bitcoin. So if you're not protecting your home privacy, which means that you don't give out your home address in almost all cases, I don't know my home address, so I never give it out. If you're not doing that, then, what is your digital privacy really getting you? It's problematic. So what are your thoughts on that, Urban?
Yeah, you touch on great point, and it's something that is dismissed a lot in the privacy community. I mean the digital privacy, and I feel you kind of have like two worlds, that don't really speak to each other. You have the crazy prepper with like like full of guns and food in his basement. And then you have the geek who has 20 VPN and no food and no idea how to do self-defense. And those are kind of like two different worlds, and they each miss a point. And I think like if you see often the weakest point is always the physical, right? Because you mentioned about smuggler, one of your guests. As he said many times, you have meat space where you actually live, where your body is physically. And if somehow someone can reach your body, they can make it very painful for you in all sorts of ways. They can physically restrict you, they can torture you, they can do all those things. And I mean, it's crazy that it happened today. But we have seen like also like one of the CEO of Ledger that got this. And in many of those cases, what is horrible is that with all those crypto influencers, they publicize some of the stuff they do. They might show their wallet on screen in a live stream or something. They don't realize the risk. And then you have armchair chain criminal, like blockchain criminal, that look at, the blockchain, try to find how much you have. And if they deem worth it, they will kidnap you. And there are many, many ways that you can mitigate this, and it doesn't have to become, the prepper in his basement. There are like middle scenarios. And it's something that sadly is almost never addressed. I mean, Jameson Loop in a bit like a wise elder in the mountain is reminding with his tweet every couple of weeks that this happened. But we don't really see anyone else, like bringing attention like this. And everybody is focusing on money, and number go up and all of those things. But they forget about this. And, if you want to be independent and use this as, digital freedom, how much is digital freedom is, your physical freedom is not secured. That's kind of the point, right? So yeah, that's something. And we also try, like, that's like the criminal aspect of it, protecting yourself from criminal. But we also try, all sorts of things in the physical world. Things like exchanging Bitcoin peer to peer, going to meetup, seeing like how the scene goes, and maybe we could touch a bit on that. And that's also something that people should how to say, they should master more their physical environment. Instead of looking at their phone constantly, they should be aware of their surroundings. They should see if something goes wrong. When I see cases of like kidnapping and, things like this, robbery, often it's not the guy who is like super aware of what happened, but it's more like, the random Joe that is constantly looking on his phone and not really paying attention to what's going on. So there is a lot of things behind this, but yeah.
I think, yeah, the Jameson Lopp example is pretty good. So Jameson Lopp is a Bitcoin developer, and he was swatted. And I had an entire episode with him, and basically, somebody who didn't like him found his address, probably because he had his home and his real name, right? And so this person found his address and swatted him. And so Jameson Lopp comes home from the gym one day, and here's the police who have basically cordoned off his entire neighborhood. And he discovers that that this had happened. And this kind of stuff happens all the time, right? You don't have to be a celebrity, although we do consult with celebrities, minor celebrities and things of this sort, where they they need to leave where they are because their home is compromised. Because I can go to truepeoplesearch.com and type in a name and get a whole bunch of information just from one website, right? And there's hundreds of these kinds of websites. So your physical privacy is something that we don't think often enough. And as people who also do a little bit of OSINT on our end, we use a lot of these tools all the time, and we can find all sorts of things about people, where they live. Of course, we have ways of looking at Instagram posts and seeing, right, where's the sun in this particular photo of this person doing a selfie, and we can get a sense of where they live. And people expose themselves in so many ways, and in an era of internet outrage that can easily lead to physical violence, that can lead to visits to your home from really undesirable people. And in the world of course, cryptocurrencies, which are very, it's a pretty tempting thing to steal because it's so permanent. And if it's, there's ways to scrub this that you maybe wouldn't be able to scrub, US dollars. So there's a lot of, there's a lot of threats to people's physical home address privacy. And that's really what we also try to protect at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think like a huge takeaway for me in all of this is the goal is that people understand the risks before something like this happens. Like, I'm sure Jameson Lopp would have loved to have more deeply thought through his physical security and his digital privacy of keeping his address private before that happened. But unfortunately, like, pain is the best teacher for most people. So a lot of times we don't learn until something like this happens to us. But hopefully, like, the reason for sharing some of these like really dark examples is that you see that there is a real need, that there can be real problems that come out of choosing poorly, about not taking steps towards personal privacy, about not thinking about physical security, and take steps before anything like that happens. That's definitely a goal here. And I know that y'all cover a lot of these topics in Escape the Technocracy. I'd really like to learn a little bit more about, like, I know we talked about the podcast, how you started that a few years ago and the reasoning behind that, but like, what led to creating Escape the Technocracy, and what's kind of the focus? Like, what do you want users to get out of it? What's the key goal? What are the main areas you cover? Yeah, I'd love to dive into that a little more.
Yeah, so basically, as I was going along, I realized that there were a lot of things that I wanted to discuss, talk about, advise people on, but the podcast wasn't the best way to do it. And, this was going to require a lot of effort. So there needs to be a price behind this. And so it became a way basically of sustaining the podcast. And if people go to escapethetechnocracy.com, as of today, you'll see a number of options. We have a newsletter, basically twice per month. We, write about 15 pages of information of our travels around the world, how we're using these privacy tools in action, all sorts of practical, tactical things. We had an article recently on how to understand phone charging, right? How do you charge your devices in the most optimal way possible? For example, if you have a battery pack and you're charging in the correct way, that you could charge that about 10 times as fast as you could your phone. So you would always want to charge that first, but it depends which battery pack you have. So we get into some technical things. I did a review recently of a bunch of Faraday bags on that newsletter. We had an article recently where we're in a foreign city in a third world, and we're going around trying to find somebody who will accept Bitcoin. And it's a kind of a hilarious and a little bit depressing journey of navigating this city and understanding that Bitcoin is not as widely as accepted as people want to think. And these websites where this shop accepts Bitcoin are not updated, certainly, and are in some cases pure fiction. So we kind of take you on our journey around the world and using these privacy tools in that newsletter. That's kind of our main thing there. And then we just have a assortment of other products where we're showing you on the screen. They're basically presentations, video presentations, whether I'm walking you through how to get South Dakota nomad residency, which is something that in the broader privacy world, it's been an excellent tactic to get an address that is not your home. Okay, that is not your home, where you can get an address that you can give to banks and all these other sort of important institutions that need an address, right? And especially if you want to be a nomad, this is the path that you might want to take, getting South Dakota nomad residency. And I cover how to do that with an expert on the topic. And then, we have a basic digital privacy course called Escape the Technocracy. And for this audience that, probably you guys already have that covered. We have a basic cybersecurity course. And then we brought on a gentleman who is really serious kind of preparedness guy. And he has partnered with us, and we talk about things like emergency food preparation, which is really cool, that particular course, preparing for a active war zone. Okay, he shares his thoughts on advising Navy SEALs and things of this sort, and some of the smaller things that they forget when they're in a really bizarre scenario where they're having to fend for their life. And he shares some of the over-the-counter civilian stuff that you can do. So there's an assortment of things on here. We have a course on using AI in a private and sovereign, most importantly, I think, uncensored way. So we have a full course talking about that, as well as a course on how to make a video game using AI, which is something that Urban put together. So there's an assortment of things on here. We're going to be releasing one on the basics of 3D printing in upcoming months, and some other cool stuff. But yeah, that's just a overview of some of the things that we're passionate about.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's definitely like y'all built out a wealth of information there that helps users be able to actually, again, take actionable steps, not just get stuck in the philosophical or in the theoretical, but figure out how to actually use these tools, see people using them in person, which I love there.
And I just want to add a quick thing. Like, if you're listening to this, you might think, how I'm not a hacker. How does this apply to me? I'm not going to be deployed in Iraq or something. And there are simple things. Like, for instance, you want to negotiate a better salary, right? You need privacy for this. You need to kind of like hide some of your cards. You need to be able to talk to people in certain ways to get what you want from them. It's not just about, I'm going to have, super incredible encryption app or things of like, how does this help you in the everyday life? I mean, we have seen things like, now you have like spywares that are installed on phones of employees, and then you end up like, I know a friend that has happened where they were discussing salary with SMS. And then basically the company saw that, their whole discussion, not out of malice, but just because this tool was reporting everything they were doing on their own phone, and they didn't think about it. So how do you hope negotiating with like, it can be as simple as that. And the other example, like after following the course for like the Navy SEAL deployment, I recently went on traveling, and I have to say, my phone battery never died on me. And I always had like all the connectivity I needed at all the time. And previously it was chronicle, you land in the country, you're at the airport, you have no battery, you don't know what to do, you cannot contact, etc., etc. And this didn't happen just because you apply some strategy. So they are very, very practical things that you can basically deploy immediately in your life, and it's going to make your life better for that.
We're basically trying to make people better sovereign individuals who are fully capable of utilizing all the latest technology in a privacy preserving way, and to be prepared for all scenarios. And I would say we're empowering people to not need others, right? To not need their government, certainly, who they probably don't trust anyway. To not need really any corporations, for the most part, right? And just in a very broad way, right? Whether that's personal privacy, protection, preparedness, energy sovereignty. These are sorts of I would say that's the kind of the main theme, the main strain of where we're going with this brand is we call it Escape the Technocracy, and we purposefully keep technocracy kind of vague, right? But just the idea that we want to be in control, we want to be in charge of not just our data, right, but our own, our own protection, and everything in between.
Yeah, and I think something that people can easily mistake is like just like when you are new to the idea of privacy, like it feels like these people who seek privacy are like these crazy shadowy people who live in the woods and are like perfectly anonymous, but that's not the vast majority of people who care about privacy. And I think it's similar with this idea of sovereignty, where it's not necessarily that everyone is going to be a prepper and have a bunker and have hundreds of guns and food to last them 10 years or something like that, but rather just giving you the choice to reclaim as much sovereignty as possible, like giving you the tools necessary so that you can say, hey, I'm really concerned about about energy sovereignty, for instance. My country is importing everything for energy. They constantly have outages and issues. How do I gain some more sovereignty in that area? And just thinking about, like, for you, practically the listener, what are some areas where you want to gain more sovereignty? Not that you have to go like whole hog, go crazy, become that crazy prepper, but you can figure out, like, again, just like digital threat modeling, like this idea of like, what do you want to protect, who you're trying to protect it from, and what lengths are you willing to go to protect yourself. Those same things can apply to many of these scenarios.
Absolutely. And another approach that we take, Seth, that I think is a little bit different from others is I'm constantly bashing the phrasing of threat models, not because I think that's and the reason I do it is really because our approach is that we want to go as far as we can, and so we're very welcoming to new people on whatever journey they're going on. But the way that I would phrase it is, we're very welcoming, but we expect you, let's say this is the dojo, right? Everybody can come join. The first month is going to be easy, but the second month, we expect you to start, you know, getting to our level, right? And that's kind of how we treat things. So we very quickly move on to intermediate and then more advanced topics, and we expect and we want people to go to that particular level. And in the case of, you're talking about our broader topics beyond privacy, this is why we partnered with a guy named Stephen Harris, who is a incredibly impressive and very serious guy. As I mentioned, he consults with certain, elements of the U.S. military and things of the sort. But at heart, he's helping individuals to become better, whether that's self-defense, preparing for really bizarre, scenarios where they have to protect themselves, or nuclear survival. We actually have a course on nuclear survival. He co-authored the book on nuclear preparedness, and he trained with a nuclear expert for 10 years in co-writing that book. Or in upcoming course that we're working on and that he's working on right now is how to have internet anywhere in the world without cable, right? And Starlink, yes, that's one part of it, but there's many other aspects to it as well. And he's got some really, really cool ideas for just how to, wherever you are in the world, be able to message people, be able to access the internet. So these are the sorts of things that we, not just the topics we talk about, but we want to go to the extreme as quickly as possible while, walking you step by step through how we get there, but always realizing that the end goal is as much as you can stomach, basically.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, it's easy to go deep, and it's great to have the opportunity to quickly go deep as well, to find like what level is good for you, and see the extremities that you can go to. I think that definitely is the most interesting course to me. I think I'm gonna have to be booking that one and learning more, because I think that's a side of things that I just haven't thought about much, like the more physical preparedness, more like disaster preparedness side of things is really fascinating. So I'll be digging into that one for sure. One thing that I'm really curious about, like, we touched on a lot of different topics, a lot of different like things that you're trying to teach people how to prepare themselves for, how they can best kind of arm themselves to be more sovereign, to take control of their digital and physical privacy and security. If you had to just, if you could get every listener to do one thing today to improve their personal privacy or security, what would that be? I know that that's a really hard question to answer, and a lot of times it's just what's top of mind for us in a given moment. But I am really curious, if you had to like distill it down to one thing, what would that kind of step be that you would want listeners to take? And it can't be to subscribe to Escape the Technocracy. I'll blacklist that answer for this one.
So instead of saying, right, get a post office box or get a way to start offloading your physical address to somewhere else, we kind of mentioned that, so I'll skip that. But that would be my first thing. I would encourage people, and I like to have these kind of controversial truisms, which I throw out there, but I would say keep things more offline. I know that one of the themes of digital privacy is we want to make use of all the technology at our fingertips, and we think that our encryption is going to make sure that we can be using cloud software and systems and still benefit from all these things. But everything has a weakness, right? And if your next cloud, you're not updating that properly and doing things correctly, even that has potential vulnerabilities. So I would encourage people, don't be arrogant in your understanding, um, in your confidence, in your ability to have digital privacy. Keep things offline as much as you can. For me, I try to do things, I use KeePass XE. I don't use Bitwarden. I want these things offline. Of course, we want to back them up properly. But I think in the long run, having more things offline and fewer things connected to the cloud, fewer, let's say, conveniences. And I don't like that word, because I think getting your information stolen is a great inconvenience. So I think that using things offline is actually quite convenient in the long run. I would say do more of that, and don't fall back on, I need to install this latest app, right? This latest encrypted app. I would say, what unencrypted or what encryption app can you uninstall, right, for better privacy today? So I just turn that on its head a little bit and encourage people. The more arrogance we have, the more we're going to get compromised, even if we are digital experts.
Yeah, I'd love that take, honestly. It fits in a lot with this idea of like digital minimalism as well, of like there are things that are necessary, and those things that are necessary, find ways to do them in a more privacy preserving way, or a way that gives you control over your data. But if you actually take a step back, the vast majority of the apps that we use, the sites that we use, the accounts that we have are just not necessary today, and at best are like a loss. Like, they're not benefiting us, and at worst they're detracting from the quality of life that we could have, because of the distractions that they bring, because of the headache of managing the accounts for them or backups or something like that. And this idea of like stripping away, doing as little as possible online, can actually be very freeing. Now it can, of course, go too far, and you can cause yourself to lose so much convenience that it actually like hurts the quality of life that you have. But so much of what we do just does not need to be online. Just, there's no reason for it, and there are fantastic tools these days to get a lot of that stuff offline. Even like an example is photo backup. There are some advantages to using an end-to-end encrypted photo backup service. There's some really good ones out there today, but you can also have a network attached storage that sits at your house, and you can sync back to that. But like you said, maybe you also just don't need photo backup. Like, one change that I've been trying to make is just, I don't take pictures and videos of everything, because I realize that the vast majority of it I'm not actually going back and looking at. And yet it's distracting me from the moment, and I'm focusing more on capturing the moment on my phone than I am about actually being a part of the moment uh, right there in person. So I definitely love that thought process, and kind of stripping back and doing more offline, less online. It's a big approach. How about you, Urban? Go ahead.
Before Urban jumps in there, I've got all sorts of USB drives and physical drives around my house. People ask me sometimes, "Oh, how do you transfer this and this between your devices?" I was just like, USB drive.
Those still exist?
They do, and they're great.
Yeah. They are great for things like the printer that doesn't work on Linux. And then you can just plug the USB key on the printer and print it from there. Like, it is so simple. Like, it's crazy when you think about it, but you have those endless thread on Linux forum. Oh, my printer doesn't work. Well, just put the document, the PDF, on a USB key and print it. Done. Anyway, so yeah, for my take, I think it joined a bit what Gabriel said. Those are all very, very good advice. Mine is like, practice, practice, practice. Like you think that, you have your non-KYC Bitcoin sitting somewhere, in your deep multi-sig underground storage, whatever, right? You've done this, you've covered, you're confident. How about starting to spend some of it just to see if you can access it, just to see if the whole thing works the way you expect. And, also things like, okay, can you change, can you change this into money somehow, oh, it's FU money. Okay, well, practice. And what you will find is that this is much, much harder than what you can imagine, like way harder. It's at a point where there have been exchange, for instance, where if you want to sell back Bitcoin, you have to send them the exact Bitcoin they sent you. Like this is coming and this is happening. And if you think you can get away with it, I would say don't just think about it, but practice. And if you think it's inconvenient, I will say that life is, we're not the creator of this world, right? We are merely, tourists, kind of, in a way. So it's not me who decided this, but life is a struggle. And if you go and you become lazy, then you're going to be eaten by something bigger than you that you don't realize that is going to take your place. And I know it's a bit like, I don't know, brutal to say it like this, but for me, like, I remember when I was a teenager, I created dozens of Google accounts and, and I was playing with trolling people. And up until recently, I was like, you know what? If I need a new Google account, no big deal, right? I can just create a new one. Wrong. Like now you need to go into like all sorts of check and KYC, and they shut everything down without telling you anything. So don't be comfortable. Go out, experiment, see what works, what doesn't. It doesn't matter if you have, gold, crypto, Bitcoin, Monero, whatever. Just use what you think you have and adapt it. And it's funny because we discuss about prepping a bit. In a way, it's similar. You have prepper, they buy, 100 of gallons of certain food and pound of this, and then they discover it tastes awful and their child doesn't like it. And then it's kind of all to waste. So this is why you need to try it out. You need to experiment with what you're setting up, and you need to do it in a kind of like a rolling basis. If you have a cold storage, then spend from it regularly, and it's fine if you want to hodl, like the maximalist ethos. That's okay. Just put some of it back in it. Buy it back. In a week or so. But you have to practice, and we see this so many times where people think they have this figured out, and then when the dirt hits the fan, they realize that, oh, this is not how they expected. And then they panic. And when you panic, this is when you make mistake. And then this is when, you send to the wrong address. You give all your KYC data because you panic and you think there is no other way around, and things like this. And you would be surprised. Sometimes it's easier than you think, and sometimes it's way, way harder. But if you don't practice, you will never know.
And the beautiful thing with practicing is that, like, yes, the practice itself is hard and it's not something that you feel like maybe in the moment is necessary. But the really beautiful thing that I've found is, like, the more you practice and actually use the tools, the more peace of mind you have when the time comes to actually use them. Because, like, there is going to be a time when you need these things. There is going to be a time when you need to actually spend your Bitcoin on a good or service. And if that's something that you've done regularly just to push yourself, it's not daunting. It's not stressful. It's not problematic when you actually need it because you've been practicing up until that point. And it actually makes life easier, in my opinion. Like, yes, there's hard work up front, but just like basically everything in life, if you're willing to put in the work up front, you'll reap benefits down the line. That applies to all of these things as well. So I think that's a really important thing too. And I specifically like that you called out this idea of, like, when you panic, that's when things go wrong. And when you panic is when your body and your mind rely on muscle memory. They rely on things that they know how to do without conscious thought. And again, if you've never actually done these things, you will have no muscle memory, no subconscious patterns to rely on. You'll fall back into just a pure state of panic with no clue what to do, and you'll make bad decisions that could lose you money, could get you in physical harm. Like, there are lots of problems that could happen then. But if you're practicing, those things don't happen, or they're not as likely to happen because you're prepared, you're ready. So I definitely like that answer. Last question for y'all, and then I'll open it up if y'all have anything else you want to cover. But I'm just kind of curious. Like, I think it's in these conversations, it's really easy to get kind of dark and pessimistic, and I wanted to kind of pull out of that a little bit. I'm really curious. Like, what is an optimistic take from y'all on the state of privacy in 2025? Like, is there anything on your radar that's helping to bring some hope to the kind of the dire straits that we seem to be in right now? What's an optimistic view on where we're at today?
That's a little bit probably the most difficult question so far, Seth. Golly. Um, there are a lot of reasons to be pessimistic. As we're recording this, it's just one kind of piece of news after another. But okay, optimism. Your show is called Opt Out, and I think that is always an option, right? I still do not encounter, for all the talk of KYC this and this is surveilled and all the rest. I still find options, right? And mostly it's involves opting out. Hey, this, I was at a place recently. They don't accept cash. Oh, okay, I'm not coming back here, right? You can always opt out. You can always find an alternative, and that's what we need to be. We need to be like Bruce Lee, right? Be like water. Just be flexible. And if somebody is not respecting our privacy, if this website is not allowing us because we don't have a VPN, there are always alternatives, and we need to find these alternatives and support these alternatives. And they're cropping up all the time. We have a lot of digital privacy companies, a lot of digital privacy software that is cropping up, that is useful, multiple options these days. Monero is thriving, right? That is an easy option for people who hate all the bank KYC surveillance BS. Easy option for people. Well, maybe not easy, but it's certainly an option. So there are ways to opt out. And I would say there's maybe never been more ways to opt out, even if there's never been more surveillance and discomfort in the way the privacy eroding systems are developing. So I would say it's precisely that. We can always choose to go elsewhere, and we can always choose to use different things, right? Linux has never been more available. There have never been more VPNs. There have never been more private ways to pay for VPNs, right? We can send cash through the mail and get a VPN subscription. Tor is still working and thriving. So yeah, we have the tools. We just need to use them more and be aware of them.
Yeah, I think that's one of the key things too, is like, even when we feel like we're stuck in this arms race where surveillance is increasing, it is an arms race. And as that surveillance state continues to increase, as governments crack down, as they push harder, it actually causes a Cambrian explosion of sorts of privacy tech, of people waking up to the need for privacy. I mean, I think like this age verification insanity that's going on in the EU right now is a perfect example of that, where lots and lots of people who had never, ever, ever thought about using a VPN or about finding ways to be able to access sites and services without proving who they are as a human, now suddenly they realize there's a need for this stuff, and they're searching and they're paying for VPNs. They're paying for services that can help them with this. And that money can go into funding even better services. Like, it is something where, like, I think we need to remember that as crackdowns continue, as things get more stringent, as insane laws get passed, as cases go south, there are benefits to that as people continue to fight to push back. And a lot of that sovereignty, the tools available, like you mentioned, continue to grow and improve as a result of that, which is definitely a hopeful thing.
And I'll just add quickly that it's also never been easier to go to a different country. You don't like the direction your country is going in. It's never been easy to get the plane ticket or a reasonable amount of money. You'd be surprised if, let's say, you live in the US, how easy it is to get to Latin America, right? To Mexico, to wherever, if that's what you want to do, and have the similar kind of life and conveniences. And because of the internet, you can work remotely and all these sorts of things. It's never been easier to escape the place that you're currently in.
Yeah. So, as for me, I would say also invest in your community and people around you. And what I mean by that is, I remember years ago when I saw the beef initiative on a Bitcoin podcast, and I was like, oh, this is so cool. Buying a grass-fed meat from farmer that accept Bitcoin. And I checked, nobody was accepting Bitcoin for beef in my region. And what I did is I did the long game. I found a farmer, and then I would go to her place every single time I wanted meat. And I did this for like 2 years, building a relationship with her, having her trust me, and like becoming a client again, not just like a data point, but an actual client that, is well treated. And in the end, I started to push for her to accept Bitcoin or Monero, and she accepted it, right? So I created my own initiative, and you can do this. It's not hard. It's investing in the future. It's like putting a tree. You first need a seed, and you need to let it grow. And if you don't work now on this, then you're never going to have it. And if you always chase for someone else to do, then you're gonna end up like always following. And the side thing of this is humans are creator and creative. And I think nowadays everything has to be convenient. Everything has to be easy. Everything has to be simple. And I push back on that. And I say, no, it's good sometimes if it's hard. What else is hard? Training, going to the gym every day, going to the dojo, fighting. That's hard. But we know that it brings tremendous health benefits, right? It makes your muscle better. It makes you a better person. So if you always go for the digital convenience, it's the same thing, You're going to become digitally bloated. You're going to have all sorts of issues. And you would be surprised how, even with minimal investment, but a constant one, you can do tremendous changes. And this is, like, build things yourself, experiment with 3D printing, experiment with, building your own things. And all of those are things, because what you have to realize is, I think there is a bit of a way, like, people feel depressed. And I think it's because we stopped we stopped, we are only service worker. We are the manager of a manager of a manager doing like Zoom meeting and Google spreadsheet. That's not that exciting. But like, build something, and go from there. And it's interesting what you said, Seth, about, taking picture. I was recently at a concert and nobody was dancing. Everybody was looking at the concert through the screen. And I'm like, you can go on YouTube for that experience. You can go on YouTube and put the name of the singer and you will get exactly that. And it's like, stop watching a screen and do something with your hand. That would be my recommendation. And it's not programming. When I say something with your hand, it's something actually physical.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. Privacy and security definitely take discipline, but you see the fruits of that just like you do when you have discipline with how you eat, when you have discipline with how you exercise and work out. I think it's a fantastic takeaway there. Well, that's all I had that I wanted to cover today. Any last minute comments or thoughts from y'all before we wrap up? Anything you want to leave the listeners with?
Yeah, let me add one thing here, which is that if you are a serious privacy seeker, you also need to consider self-employment. And this is where we get into this very holistic thing, because you'll see these people and they have whatever, a samurai wallet sticker on their laptop, and they think, oh, I'm serious about my privacy, but they're an employee, right? Which means that they have to live in a particular area and they have to give their social security number and other information. They're forced to be on LinkedIn per the company's policies, whatever the case may be. So there's a little bit of a theater, I think, to a lot of people in the privacy community. I'm probably hitting some heartstrings for listeners right now. So if you're very serious about privacy, another thing that you need to do is to become fully sovereign with your life, which means you seek unemployment, which means that you approach the world with a company's name and not your personal name. And you're not having to give out a lot of this personal information that a company requires of you. You're not forced to live in a particular area and then tell them, right, what your address is and what have you. So seeking self-employment and then potentially things like homeschooling and all the rest, these are really big steps that a lot of people listening probably know that they need to take, that they should take, but that they haven't yet. So I'd encourage people to take steps in those aspects as well.
How about you, Urban? Any
Yeah.
last minute comments?
Yeah, so I will jump back on my own comment about doing something with your hands. We have a product called Eldorado Kit, which is basically encoding a seed phrase into a beautiful Inca-inspired kind of like knots and string. It's like an old way. It's how the Inca wrote. They didn't really had an alphabet. They had like a binary code of like pearls and attached to strings called kipu. And we teach you how to make your own and to put any information you want. Now we do it with the seed phrase, but you could do it with anything. And you only need, a few beads and a few strings, and that's it. And you can find this, and it's a cool thing to do, and also to learn about this ancient culture. And yeah, so do something with your hands. That's something very important. We are missing that in our society, in our digital society.
Even if that thing is encoding your seed phrase into knots and string, that would be a fascinating thing to do with your hands. I definitely need to see how that works. Never heard of that before.
We'll send you a link to that.
Yeah.
That is that's one of our toolkits on escapethetechnocracy.com. And it just goes back to the physical offline backups that we think are so important and such a critical part of privacy is to have all that stuff offline. And as Urban did in a creative way, utilizing ancient technology that helped the Incas hide from the Spanish for decades.
And if you have the Spanish Inquisition coming, or someone trying to steal your stuff, and they see this tribal art thing, they are probably going to be to dismiss it. Because when you have this fancy titanium coated steel marine grade space military resistant plate, it looks very obvious like a crypto backup. But if it's a random string with some things attached to it, it doesn't scream crypto at all. And we have a lot of those products where it's like you built it yourself. If you go to Walmart, there is nothing there is no special hardware you need. So you don't really it doesn't scream. It is not like suspicious or anything. And you can do this with off the shelf things. And we have a few like this, those kits that you can do. So yeah, I will send you the PDF set.
Amazing. Yeah, we'll definitely get that in the show notes because I think that's definitely one of the more different, more interesting things that I've heard covered here. So we'll get that in there. Well, thank you guys so much. Fantastic getting to chat again, getting to pick your brains. Y'all are doing amazing work in the space. I'm really excited to see how y'all keep building Escape the Technocracy, who you keep having on your awesome show, Gabriel and Watchman Privacy Pod. Y'all are doing amazing work. Thank you for coming on.
You as well, Seth. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode of Opt Out. If you did, please take a moment and subscribe to the podcast, or if you're already subscribed, share it with one friend or family member this week. As always, you can check out the link to the guest content and contact info, as well as links to all of the tools we discussed in today's episode. Now get out there and opt out this week.